I made a new workbench. It's rock solid, mobile, low cost, and easy to make. Stay tuned to see how to build it. A couple of months ago, I started converting part of our barn into a workshop. Now that the workshop is done, I'm working on setting everything up to make it into an amazing place to build whatever I can dream up. I started with the French cleat wall, then added some tool holders. Now it's time to do something about the workbench. My current workbench is just not practical for the new shop. It's too big and I can't move it around at all. Back when I first built this bench, I wanted to have a 4x8 surface so that I could lay out a full sheet of plywood and cut it down to more manageable pieces. The workbench was great for that, but you don't really need it to be 4x8 in order to cut a full sheet of plywood. It can be a little smaller and work just as well. This bench was supposed to be mobile, and it was at first, but over time I started to add cupboards and drawers to it, and before long it was too heavy for the wheels, and they ended up getting destroyed when I tried to move it. Someday I hope to be able to design and build a high quality workbench made from hardwood, with a proper woodworking vise and holes for bench tops. But a bench like that is not on the cards for now, and it may be some time before I'm able to make such a bench. So my plan for now is to take this old bench apart and reuse as much of it as I can to build the new temporary bench. The first step is to dismantle this old bench. On the end of the bench, I'd added a pegboard, and any tools that were down there are now going to be on the French cleat wall, so I won't be adding any pegboard to the new bench. These drawers and cupboards were added a while after the bench was built, and it was built as a module that just slid into place. So once the drawers and cupboard doors are out of the way, I can slide it all out and take it apart. It's a bit tough to get it out. But eventually I managed to remove it. With all that stuff out of there, the bench got a lot lighter, and I can move it around and get a look at the damage to the casters. And they're pretty mangled. Now I need to pull off these pine boards that were basically just added for decoration, but also worked as something to clamp things to. Now the top comes off pretty easy. I'm going to reuse this melamine on the next bench, so I'll put that aside for later. And now I can just pull out all the rest of the screws to finish dismantling the old bench. I'm going to reuse some of these 4x4 posts, so I'll set those aside as well. This part of the floor has not seen the light of day in a couple of years, so now I can finally clean it all and get ready to build the new bench. My first step is to cut the 4x4 posts. I need 4 legs at 40 inches long. I want the bench to be fairly tall so I'm not bending at the back when I'm working at the bench. I'll also cut 4 posts to 75 inches long for the stretchers, and 4 at 27 inches long for the short stretchers. Now I lay them out on the ground and attach them with these 6-inch lag screws. These screws have threads down at the end, so they'll pull the 2 posts together nice and tight. They worked great. I found out about these screws from a video by Ben Tardif. He recently made a workbench and used screws similar to these ones. I'll link that video below. I repeat this same step and now I have the 2 ends. So now I'll just stand them up and add the long stretchers. I use some clamps to rest the stretchers on while I attach the screws. Now I have my basic frame, and everything appears to be nice and square. So next I want to add some supports to the top and the bottom. Oh yeah, and painted as well. These 4x4 posts are treated, and that's not a bad thing because in this part of the shop the concrete floor has no vapor barrier under it, and anything left sitting on it can get a little damp. But the treated posts don't look so good. So I painted them with the same gray paint that I used for the French cleat wall. These cross supports will hopefully keep the top from sagging like it did on my old workbench. When I added the cross supports to the bottom, the plan was to put some plywood down there, just as a place to store a few things. But I changed that plan, as you'll see later. Now I'm ready to add the top, and the top is going to be 2 sheets of melamine, one that was on the old bench, and one that's been sitting in the shop for a very long time. The first step is to trim it down to size, and for that I can actually start using the new bench. The first piece will be screwed down to the frame from the top. I'm not worried about these screws showing, since the other piece of melamine will be on top of this one. But before I do that, I want to take the router to it with a flush trim bit to get the melamine the exact same size as the bench frame. Melamine in a router sure can be a big mess. Now the same process for the next sheet of melamine. I cut it down to rough size, but this time I'll attach it from the bottom, using screws through the first sheet of melamine, then back to the router to trim it down to size. My original plan for the bottom was to use a sheet of plywood, but I don't actually have anything that'll fit. So I decided to use some of the boards that I reclaimed from the barn. First, I cut them to length on the miter saw. They're pretty dirty, so I'm going to sand them to clean them up a bit. For the 2 end pieces, I'll cut out a notch for the legs with the jigsaw. And now I can lay them all out to be sure they fit. And they do. Now I just add the screws. Only 2 more things left to do. The first is add the casters. These casters are able to lift the bench and lower it. That way, if I ever need to move it around, then I can, but the rest of the time, it'll be sitting on the floor, nice and stable. And last, I wanted to do a little round over on the top sheet of melamine. One of the downsides of MDF type products is that the edges can be really brittle, and adding a little round over really helps to avoid that. This is a workbench, and it'll get beat up no matter what, but I hope to have it last as long as possible, or at least till I can afford to build the fancy workbench. So there it is, all done and ready to use. I have it sitting in front of the French cleat wall, and now I have everything I need close at hand. Well, almost everything. I still have a few more tool holders to make and add to the tool wall. That might be next week's video. I've also ordered a bandsaw. That should arrive sometime this week, and I plan to do an unboxing and review on that once it arrives. If that sounds like fun, consider subscribing so you won't miss out on future videos. And thanks for watching.